this whole concept of like, wouldn't it be easier to fit in? The way you're describing it is, it's kind of not easy regardless of what you do. So you may as well choose yourself if you have the capability and the surroundings to support that.
Unfortunately, in our North American society, we are encouraged to conform to, like, on any number of topics, to be safe, rather than being authentic. There's a really kind of deeply embedded script that reproduces that for just about everybody. Why don't you just fit in? Is a question trans and non-binary people hear, often from people who care and they're trying to be kind. But underneath it is an assumption that fitting in is easier than being authentic. In this episode, we're unpacking why cisgender support often centers on comfort and conformity, why trans men and women are accepted only if they fit familiar expectations, and why non-binary people are often told directly or indirectly that it would be easier not to change at all. Because what's rarely acknowledged is the cost of not being authentic and the unspoken belief that your change forces something on me. This conversation asks us to slow down, listen to stories beyond the binary, stories that have existed for decades, and rethink what ease really means when authenticity is on the line. And as ever, I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Elle. Hello, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing very well. How are you?
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm having a great day.
I'm really glad that we're talking about this one because it's something that I think even if it's not directly asked, it's sort of alluded to a lot of the time. Like, why are you making your life harder than it needs to be by, doing certain things that feel authentic to you? And so with that kind of thought, so wouldn't it be easier to just try and fit in? Why do you think that question does come up so often?
Yeah, it's on the surface a bit perplexing for trans and non-binary people to hear. They're like, "What?" But I appreciate that for some, they're trying to ensure that their trans or non-binary friend, family member, coworker are going to be okay. So it's coming from a good place, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I want to protect you, but the protection is coming from you should do something different versus like, how can we create an environment where you can be safe? So it's just a different focus. But I know why people focus on the person in front of them, because that's a more manageable change than changing the whole system, right?
Right.
So
yes.
that's part of what's behind that type of question. But the reason why it comes up is people, as far as I can tell, and I'd love to hear from others if they have additional ideas or alternatives, but are really wrestling with what this means, and that they have very strong notions of these are societal expectations, and there's almost this sense of risk in diverging from them or doing something different. It's like, holy smokes, what are you doing? This is you're going to be like a groundhog above ground, and you're going to be hurt. And so this like conformity to protect is a really big thing that comes up a lot. And so it can create this strain between cisgender and trans and non-binary folks because there's this misunderstanding, and people don't realize what they're actually asking trans and non-binary folks to do.
So it's sort of usually coming from a caring place, but it's like it almost feels like a kinder option to some people, some cis folks, to just not push the boat out a little too much, or just not to make yourself so noticeable with being different, simply because they know the risks that are involved with transitioning. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. Or showing up in a different appearance, right? Like there's so many different aspects to it. And unfortunately, in our North American society, we are encouraged to conform to, like, on any number of topics, to be safe, rather than being authentic. There's a really kind of deeply embedded script that reproduces that for just about everybody.
Right. Hmm. You've talked about yourself and your own experiences and not wanting to, I can't remember the words you used, but it was something about not wanting to be disruptive. And because you yourself felt relatively neutral,
Mm.
um, you were kind of considering not
Hmm.
causing that disruption. And so I was kind of wondering about your experiences of where that shift came from, and
Yeah.
especially as like joy, you talked about joy and the
Mm.
feeling more than just neutral is
Right.
okay. Wanting to feel more than just neutrality about yourself is
Right.
possible. And so yeah, I was wondering if you could, especially in reference to the sort of as joy comes in,
Mhm.
what that was like for you, if that's okay.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah, it's helpful to share stories, of course, if people are comfortable, and certainly I am in this instance. So before I came out, I had a very early understanding that, I was trans. But what I was going to do about it, that was the kind of kicker and the key
Mm,
question. So is that clarity can be with somebody, from fairly early age, but doing something about it is a big step. And for many, including myself, there's hesitation. You know, there's costs, real tangible
mm,
costs to these steps. And especially since, there's the narrative out there typically about born in the wrong body.
yeah.
And that didn't really resonate for me. I kind of had a neutral posture towards my body. It was okay, but I I couldn't really connect to my body or my presentation. Like I tried different things even in my expression, and each one of them was like more looking from the outside onto something rather than me
Mm,
being in my body, if that
right.
makes sense. And so I, of course, did decide to come out and to share with others. And then in the process of that, connecting more deeply and closely to my body through a series of steps. And then I realized, oh, this is because those steps created a lot of joy, like in some instances, extreme joy. So extreme, just a little side note that I actually had so much joy that I needed to like get it out because it was like so like bottled up. So I had to play. I learned how to play the trumpet. It's like this joyful, albeit not very. It was very cacophonous, very like not very well played trumpet, but it was just so much excitement that I was finally felt at home in my own body and my expression. And so it's not just about kind of troubles with one's bodies or neutrality. We're trying to get to a place of like actually belonging and feeling excited, maybe not all the time, but just good about ourselves
Mm,
as trans and non-binary folks. So for me, that is worth the um, it doesn't even come into the equation. Like it needs to happen. If
yeah.
you ask cisgender folk, if they um, would be themselves, like people wouldn't even know how to answer that question. Of
Hmm.
course, you want to be yourself. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's kind of a perplexing thing, but for me, it's actually about joy,
Hmm.
and sure, certainly I appreciate the costs, and but it doesn't come into play because like I choose joy.
Right, of course. I
Mm.
love that. Thank you for sharing.
Mm.
And on this, then, you talked about the costs, and there are a lot of costs to so many people who choose to come out, or maybe they don't choose to come out specifically because of the risks and those costs.
Yeah.
Um, and I sort of, going on from your experience, I wanted to ask about the cost to not doing that, to not
Mm.
coming out, or to not kind of expressing yourself authentically.
Mm.
And even though that cost isn't always visible from the outside, you might
Mm.
seem like you fit in, but
Yeah.
that kind of, that cost to yourself and the sort of self abandonment almost, but also
Mm.
within that, what gets overlooked when you only focus on the risk of transitioning
Mm.
And, I suspect it's going to be joy since that's what you just talked about. But I would like to go into that a bit further if that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so true. And, I want to be careful about, talking about the risks. And I appreciate that some people, it's a difficult decision to come out, and there may be pause or maybe
Hmm.
avoidance of coming out because of these risks. So I'm handling them quite sensitively because it's a lot,
Hmm.
like there's, and of course not with everyone, but we know from research that there's high degrees of depression, anxiety. For some, it can come to a place of great despair.
Right.
And so many trans stories of right before coming out, there is the kind of hitting a rock bottom of that dissonance between what's inside and what's seen from the outside or expressed on the outside just being just light years away and different.
Right.
And so that can have a huge cost. There can also be substance abuse for people who, managing that dissonance, reach for things to help them with that. It's a coping mechanism because it's just too much to bear.
Hmm.
There can be other types of acting out that may seem like it's really unrelated, but some examples of that may be mysterious even. Like, a lot of trans women or trans feminine folk go into the military
Right.
because they're like, okay, I'm gonna try this thing that society expects me to be, and I'm gonna do it like hundredfold, like on fire.
Right.
Masculinity times 10. Let's do it,
Hmm.
And but that then almost pushes it to another extreme because it's then much further away from who they actually are. Similarly, on the trans masculine side of the spectrum, for myself included, I like femmed up like to a wild degree.
Right.
So, I really leaned into that and I was like, hey, if I'm gonna do it, and again, this like I almost put on a performance because I was like, okay,
Mm.
I gotta really let's try this, and really
Yeah.
commit. Um, but then, of course, it really does push things, because it's just totally inauthentic. But
Yeah.
we're trying to be valiant in the face of very difficult things inside of us. So all of that to say that, there's a huge cost to
Mm.
folks, emotionally, connecting with other people. People can distance themselves, isolate, a whole number of things, as they're wrestling with these internal, matters. And on the flip side, you know, I want to say this, like 100% happens. Obviously, coming out is a complex process and can have many different factors to it, but there can be a really positive, aspect to fully being oneself, in terms of much better mental health, be wanting to connect with other people, and productivity at work because it just unlocks this energy that was kind of in a grind, and kind of, weighted down by this
Hmm.
dissonance. So, there's many other, benefits. If, say, for example, for two spirit folks wanting to be participating in culture, and connecting with language, and is just like interested in, being a part of a community and wanting to do sport, it's like on and on that people just
Hmm.
are kind of activated and ready to be involved in life. Not to say that that solves everything. Obviously, there's still stigmatization and people struggle with that, and can still have an impact on mental health and have isolation involved. So sometimes for some people, because there's so much stigmatization, it may not look different from before to after. So I did want to
Right.
preface that as well. Yeah.
Hmm. I think that's something that's probably quite relatable. Not obviously not all of it, but to
Mhm.
quite a lot of people, regardless of gender, and sort of talking about something completely different. I think that
Yeah.
probably the majority of us have been in situations where there's been a lot going on for you personally, but you have to sort of put on a brave face to present
Mm,
yourself in a certain
yeah.
way, whether it's at work or school or whatever it is, at friends,
Mm,
I don't know, at events. Like most of us have probably experienced that. So if you can kind of imagine that all the time, it's exhausting. And it's not as it's that this whole concept of like, wouldn't it be easier to fit in,
mm,
the way you're describing it is, it's kind of not easy regardless of what you do,
mhm.
so you may as well choose yourself if you have the capability and the surroundings to support that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good way of putting it. I really like that. Because yeah, at the end of the day, and I'm not doing a pro coming out, because I appreciate
Sure, of
there's
course.
like so many layers, and also want to recognize, a cultural aspect to coming out. For some, especially in more collectively oriented cultures, like that's like there's another layer there for them to
Yeah.
unpack. And so I never want to say, like pro, but yeah,
Yes.
certainly I do see tremendous value in coming out, and because
Mm.
yeah, there's just so much at play. And there's like almost like a giving of a gift to oneself in that
Mm-hmm.
process.
It also, the way that you described at least your experience, and then obviously I know you can't speak for all trans people, but for the
Well,
conversations I've had sort of within the community too,
mhm,
um, that coming out usually follows quite a long period of really trying to fit
mm,
in. Like the way you described your own, your own experiences, that you did try and
oh
fit.
yeah,
If the question is, isn't it easier to just try and fit in? There was an attempt for quite a
yeah,
long time.
so true.
It's not like you just woke up and decided to be trans the minute you realized. So
Yeah, I had a thought and was
yeah,
like, okay, let's do it. Done.
right.
So true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I yeah, that comes up quite a bit, is people don't have a view into the attempts, in air
Right.
quotes, right? I mean,
Yes.
I would invite any cisgender person to try to be another gender,
Mm-hmm.
and the impossibility of that. Like, sure, you can do certain things or put clothes on, or have a shorter haircut or whatever, right? But it just is, it's hollow, you
Yeah.
know and I think that's what people don't realize, is this is something that a lot of trans people have thought long about, sometimes decades, sometimes half a century, like really long
Right. Yeah.
time. And even if they didn't, that's okay too, right? I want to support trans and non-binary youth too, who maybe they didn't take a long time, and that's okay too. It's just, but all that to say that just because somebody might not have a view into that, doesn't mean it's important not to dismiss, or assume that nothing has happened, right? That people have gone
Right.
through a process. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've been talking so far about um, the sort of process of coming out and
Mm,
deciding whether that's something you can or can't do,
mm,
and this kind of whole concept of fitting in. But even once that decision has been made and somebody has come out,
mm,
there is this whole other area of, wouldn't it be easier to just fit in? And
mm,
especially when it comes to trans men and trans women, there is this expectation that once you have
mm,
come out and you've shared that you're trans with with people, you
mm,
then have to conform to the gender that you are. So if you are a trans woman, you are expected to wear makeup and put a dress on
yeah.
and grow your hair long, and if you're a trans man, you must, I don't know, live in a suit and grow a beard and get your hair short. And like that's not
Mm,
authentic necessarily, to regardless of gender. It's not authentic to people if it isn't authentic to them. And so
right.
where is this pressure coming from, do you think? Or like,
Oh,
where is that coming from?
oh my gosh. It's so learned. It's fascinating. People don't
Mm,
realize like the amount of like from childhood on, how every little moment there's like this reinforcement of boys this, girls that, men
mm-hmm,
that, women this, right? And it's so much volume of that it's all around us. We don't even sometimes even see it, which is
mm-hmm.
fascinating, right? That it's
Right.
happening so often. But it's been there for a long time, and even I sense that often. But then, unfortunately, especially in the early days of coming out, there's a lot of talk about towards whether with the trans person or without the trans person, people have they're a Twitter with like, oh, they don't quite fit. Um,
Right.
or hopefully they'll get there. They ought to get there. Like there's all these
Mm.
very subtle ways that people are communicating. You're either on the mark or off. And it's hugely damaging because even if somebody wanted to do that, maybe they can't. Um,
Hmm.
even if, say, they're, doing gender affirming care, you know, it has its own pathway. It may not land exactly how we expect. Um, and also sometimes people don't want to fit in. That's not their purpose or not their authentic way. It's not for them, and that's the same
Hmm.
for cisgender. Like there are plenty
Exactly.
of
Yeah.
cis folk for whom that's a pass,
Hmm.
and but frequently people get questioned on that. um, Even in my experience, very subtle. Like I want to be very clear, I got very mild end of this. I think trans women, trans femme folk get this way more, and
Hmm.
it's incredibly harmful. Just I've talked to a lot of trans women, and I hear it over and over, and it's really sad. For me, on my end, I got very well-meaning people giving me gifts that were very, masculine coded. Some of them were great, like cool,
Sure.
sure, they fit, but in some of them, they were off because they were trying to fit this mold that rather than like being attuned to maybe what I was interested in, they're like,
Mm.
nope, golf shirt and
Right. Men like this. Yeah.
yes. And I was like, oh, and I may have said this on other podcasts, but I gotta say, men's clothing is so dreary. It's so
Agreed.
boring.
Boring.
Like, cool if
Although I'm
that's your
loving
style,
loving the floral shirt right now
right?
though.
Exhibit A, right? So,
Hmm.
yeah. And so, again, very mild, very well intentioned. Um,
Hmm.
I was able to handle it and, just help them because they were near and dear to me. But it kind of comes up a lot. And one little anecdote too, I had several friends who, because I had a very femme phase, were really stuck there in my early coming out. They're like,
Right.
they said over and over, at pretty much ad nauseum. At one point, I had to kind of shut them down. They're like, "You're too feminine to transition." They basically said, because you're inclined to some aspects of femininity or feminine expression, that kind of discounts you being a man. And I was
Right.
like, interesting.
Right.
um, so that's how deep it is, to the point where
Yeah.
people can question whether somebody is trans, or that this is their path without understanding how deep it runs. This is not about the clothing that one wears, or the expression that one has. So yeah, all of that to say, and of course, I'm not the only one who gets that. There are a lot of people who get questions, comments, stares. They're like, "Are you sure you're trans?" Because of whatever is.
Mhm.
So, so there's just a flavor of some of the things that trans men and women experience, um, where it's like you need to fit in order to be accepted for the gender that you are, rather than being like, you are the gender, full stop, and whatever else is extra.
And you sort of said this briefly, but we don't have the same expectations for cisgender people.
Mm,
it's not a shock to see a cisgender woman who presents in a very masculine way.
mhm.
It's maybe there's a bit more restrictions on the way that we accept men potentially, but
Yes.
I would say that we're a lot more accepting of differences
Mm.
of gender expression amongst cisgender people. But the idea of if you've transitioned, what's the point in
Yeah.
doing all of that if you
Yeah.
haven't, if you're not willing to then conform to what's expected? Is It's quite a weird thing that we just don't apply to cisgender people.
Yeah. It goes a little bit deeper. I'm just thinking about this now. Is And this is a little bit more in the past when it comes to accessing gender affirming care. It used to be that you had to demonstrate, and we used to call it, we didn't in the community, but the medical community was to call it real lived experience.
Yeah.
And what that meant is if you were a trans woman, you had to dress feminine, and you had to employer like sign off on that you appeared, in a, I don't think it was specifically a dress, but you know what I mean? Like,
It's so
oh,
like
it's
I
wild.
think that's so staggeringly cruel to
Yeah.
put someone in that position.
Yeah. And it's like you go from one conformity or like a
Hmm.
performance to another. And
Hmm.
it's just like, oh, we're just doing the same thing. But okay, we're getting a little closer, but this intervention, and so there's this like view from the outside into a person's experience and kind of controlling them in order to be able to access the care that they need. So
Yeah.
it's like you had to do a year of that, and of course people do it because they really need the care, and so like, okay, let's do this. But it's awful and it has an impact.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Now, we've talked about the expectations of trans women and trans men.
Mhm.
So, what about non binary people then?
Mhm.
Where do they fit when it comes into sort of conforming? And we expect trans women to do X, Y, and Z, and to look a certain way in order to fit as trans as women,
Mhm.
and the same goes for trans men. So, yeah, what happens with non-binary people? What um,
Yeah.
pressures do they have, or also how do you perform non-binary-ness?
Right.
Please
I
tell me.
mean,
I'd love to know.
you're like, I'm here taking notes.
Yeah.
Like, well, I mean, according to some cisgender people, there's a very strong expectation that non-binary folks all look androgynous. That's a
Mm,
very big one. So it's like if you're either femme or masculine presenting, it's like, what's going on here? Are you really
mhm,
non-binary? Like, who, what, they just like can't kind of compute. For many, uh, it's like you're only accepted if your gender identity aligns with your gender expression. And so,
mhm,
and somehow we've mapped on, even maybe not many people have thought about it or known about non-binary folks, but we've already mapped on androgyny to non-binariness. And so it's
mhm,
like, okay, that was fast. Another thing that can happen that I've heard is that non-binary folks are discouraged from coming out at all, or
mhm,
accessing gender affirming care. They're like, why do it? It doesn't make any sense. What are you doing? Why disrupt your life this much? For what? Like people don't
mhm,
understand like how fundamental this is to their being. And so we'll wholesale dismiss and we'll want to like invisibilize. I don't know if that's a verb, but we'll like actively want to erase non-binary folks. And
mhm,
largely because in our society, we have, or I would say Western society, have largely not seen or understood the spectrum of gender identity. We've thought only men and women, boys and girls, that's it. Case closed, and everything else, what are you talking about?
right.
Versus, especially in a lot of ancient societies around the world, and here also in Turtle Island, with Two Spirit folks and indigenous societies, definitely had a much better understanding of that diversity that exists for gender, and had a place for it. And
Mhm,
we don't have contact with that in Western society.
mhm.
What's some of the things that you've heard, uh, maybe to add to what I've mentioned?
Yeah, well, it's sort of the same, really. There is somebody who presents quite in quite a feminine way. There
Mhm.
is this sort of complete disbelief that I
Mm,
am non-binary because of that, and it did it sort of maybe this time last year, I was really well, like even before coming out, it's one of the things that caused me to hesitate
mm,
because I was like, oh, I don't know, like it's not really a big deal because I'm not going
right.
to change the way I look. So,
Mm,
but it's like this equation of telling people, sharing with the people that I care about and love,
mm,
the real authentic part of me versus having to perform in some way to
mm,
like be validated or I don't know, I don't know, it just feels like a performance having to. I did go through I never went through an androgynous phase, but I did go through a slightly. I shaved the back of my head. Did I tell you?
Mhm.
I did tell you that.
Yeah.
Tried to be a little bit more mask. That's the most I did.
A
It didn't
splash
help.
of mask.
A little cheeky bit of mask,
Mhm.
but it didn't happen for me. Um, but yeah, there's this idea of having to, like, rather than gender just being something that you can play with, like especially your
Mm.
expression, like it can be so playful and fun, and you can just figure out what fits and what doesn't.
Mhm.
um, and it doesn't need to be ascribed to a gender. Like you
Right.
can just, and also what I find interesting is this idea of androgyny, because I have had that question before, but androgyny
Right.
usually means mask. It doesn't, like there
Mm.
aren't really,
True.
dresses aren't androgynous, but jeans are.
Mm.
And it's just, I find that really interesting, unless you are necessarily, like maybe as a sort of, I was assigned female at birth, so
Mhm.
it's expected that I would be more masculine presenting, and that would class as androgyny. And
Right.
I don't know, but maybe if somebody were assigned male at birth, they would be expected to be more feminine, perhaps, in
Mm.
order to perform androgyny. And it's like,
Right.
why? Like, let us just wear what we want to wear.
Yeah.
It's very shallow. It's sort of reducing an identity down to like what clothes I wear, and that really depends on all sorts of things. I don't wear what I used to wear in 2008, and thank goodness for that. But that doesn't mean my my gender identity is different. So,
Right. 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 Well, and that's a good point because sometimes people show up in a different expression at work, and then suddenly people are reverse engineering and are like, "Oh,
mm,
are you transitioning? Are you going to come out as trans?" Like,
right,
it's just like hyper vigilant. And you're like, wait a second, this person is just expressing themselves,
just
you
wearing
know?
clothes. It's
Yeah.
all right. Yeah,
Yeah. And maybe there's more to it, or maybe
sure.
not. Maybe it's just different expression as people
Hmm.
evolve, right? As to your point, right? So, and it not
Hmm.
have to do anything about gender. It's just people want to wear hoop earrings. Done.
Right. Yeah.
So,
No one, yeah, it doesn't mean anything. And I also think that, like you talked about, really leaning into like femininity in performing that. I had a real rejection of femininity
mm,
when I was younger. There was not all the time. It was a very short-lived period of my life,
sure.
but not the shaved head era that I was in.
Right.
The an era before that, when I was in
Mm,
school, I decided that I hated everything girly and pink, and that was like complete
mm,
rejection of the way I wanted to express my gender. And also, I didn't have the language for it at the time, but I can see now that it was me struggling with my gender,
mm,
not necessarily always feeling aligned with being a girl. This is when I was a teenager, and
right.
therefore rejecting everything that I really liked,
Mm,
because I didn't know how to fit, like I didn't know how to fit in with all of that. And
mm,
it's quite a confusing thing when you don't have a blueprint for any of it. So
for
I
sure.
I think that yeah, I think it's an interesting idea that we have these expectations of how people should fit in,
Yeah.
and we can just all benefit from relaxing that, I think.
Yeah. 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 And I'll just add that expectations doesn't always mean saying something. I think sometimes people are like, oh, it's only if you say something.
Mhm.
Even if you stare and
Yeah.
or like, like sometimes we squint with suspicion, like these subtle cues that we're putting out there and people are sometimes picking up, right? And it
Mhm.
can kind of vibe that it's not right. um,
Mhm.
Even double takes can
Yeah, I was
really
about to
be
say.
disconcerting. Do you know from personal experience?
No, I've never. Well, I've been
Mm,
with friends
mm,
where people have very visibly done a double take, and it's like
mm.
nothing was said. They then got
Yeah,
on with their lives, but that double take changed the mood slightly, and
yeah,
it made my friend feel different,
yeah,
even though they were just expressing themselves,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
as we all do.
Yeah. And it's like that we kind of started with the question, why don't you just fit in? That double take is that question, right?
Hmm.
So it's really interesting and it can come through in subtle and not so subtle ways. So, yeah.
Hmm. You alluded to this or you didn't allude to it, sorry, you directly said this in the um in your introduction. You mentioned about um this awareness that when somebody transitions,
Mm,
the people around them have to adjust to.
Mm,
So when this question is presented, why don't you just try to fit in?
mm,
It's maybe comes from a place of care, but there might also be this little sort of
mm,
thought in someone's head that, oh, you're changing,
mhm.
and now I'm going to have to do something about that. I'm going to have to change my behavior. I'm going to
Yep.
have to adjust in some way. And
Mm.
especially cis people kind of grappling with the changes that they're being asked to make, like how does that what does that look like, or how do you see
Yeah.
that?
Oh, that's such a good one. And yeah, coming out is a big step for somebody to share, but then there's the receiving end of it of now cisgender family members, friends, coworkers are
Mm-hmm.
asked to do things differently, whether it's a new set of pronouns, whether it's one set or multiple, or a neo pronoun, which might be new for somebody. It could be a different name, and there's like deep patterns established around these types of things, right? It's not like
Mm-hmm.
a small thing. How people have talked about or even kind of like imagined that person's life is different, right? We
Right.
often kind of map forward. I think, especially parents, like I,
Yes.
I think it's understandable. Like I don't in any way fault parents for doing this. Like you're like, okay, and then they'll do this, and maybe marriage, maybe kids, and and
Mm-hmm.
they see their child going to play a particular role within each of those steps, right? And when somebody comes out, it just kind of blows up that image.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so there's kind of a reconciling or like figuring out or remapping or a whole number of steps or practicing to be able to more fluently say a new name or a different set of pronouns or whatnot. It's just there is an effort. And
Right.
I think humans in general, no matter the topic, are can be averse to change.
Right.
Like our minds want to follow patterns, and especially if they're well established over decades, like people would rather try to negotiate their way out of it rather
Mm.
than take on the change. And that negotiation can look like the question, why don't you want to fit in, or it could be
Mm-hmm.
even resistance, like this is not a thing, to total
Mm.
dismissal. It could be anger, like
Right.
why are you doing this to me type of vibes. It could be all kinds of different things, but at the end of the day, what is being asked is pretty small relative to what is at play for that individual, the depth to which this goes. And with a little practice, it actually isn't as difficult. It may look at the first glance like, holy crap, this is a lot. Versus, you know, a year or so down the road, it's if intentional effort has been applied, it's actually not big of a deal. Like I've heard my mom at some point be like, I don't know why I made this such a big deal, in
Right.
hindsight. Of course,
Sure.
hindsight is always, easier, but
Yeah, of
and we have to
course.
go through a process. It's okay, but it's well worth that process, and it's an important one for sure. So yeah, just gives you some sense of that what's happening on the receiving end. One other thing I wanted to add is, and we'll put a link to this in the show notes, is oftentimes people, especially when it comes to non-binary gender identities, will say this is new, right?
Mm.
Where did this come from? As if to say this has never existed before.
Right.
And I was recently on YouTube and I came across this TV show segment, like a talk show, and they were interviewing somebody who what we would describe now as non-binary. Back then, they had a different word for it, and just like answering very candidly, very openly. Um, but kind of, you could tell the interviewer was really struggling. This is probably back in the 80s. And so just like
Mhm.
totally mystified by this non-binary person, but this the interviewee just being very thoughtful, but also not kind of giving in to the pressure that some of the questions inadvertently were creating.
Yeah.
you know, um, and I think actually this, now that I think about it, that interview had the question. The interviewer did ask, why don't you just fit in? And so that is what inspired this whole episode. And it's a very beautiful response. So I invite you to,
Mm-hmm.
and I won't spoil it, how they respond to that, but it just gives you another lens into um, the depth of this type of experience. So, anyways, just a final plug on that, and
Mm-hmm.
encourage folks to see it.
I really love that interview because it's sort of done with so much sincerity. The
Mhm.
person asking the questions really just has no idea what this person is talking about, and
Yeah.
yet asks questions that is just curiosity and not really judgment, even though that question
Mhm.
of why don't you try and fit in, it's not, at least when I watched it, it was
Yeah.
more just like, this is hard. It's not
Yeah.
a judgment on this person. And I
Mhm.
think it's such a beautiful example of um, maybe not asking all of those questions that they
Right.
asked, but just like, you're allowed to be curious, and
Mhm.
that doesn't mean judgment. You can
Mhm.
have openness to it.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully be surprised by some of the answers in ways that
Mhm.
not only like share from that person's experience, but then also provide a broader insight into our own gender, and maybe shed light on things that you've not thought about for your own gender, and we can all kind of fill out the picture further collectively. So at least that's my
Mhm.
hope. So yeah.
I hope so. Cool. Well, thank you so much. I'll share that in the show notes, a link to that interview. And yeah, thank you so much, Kai.
Yeah, thank you too, and bye for now.
See you. Bye.